So do you feel that the expectations for this TSA coming online are high from an analyst's point of view?
Well, I think the expectations from the TSA would probably be more relevant when you consider the sort of, how would I say, the sort of malfeasance that public funds were subjected to in the past. It's good enough that at least they're not directly borrowing government money back, but the reality is that before the TSA, you had stories of government officials putting government funds in banks and then collecting interest. Meanwhile, they hadn't paid salaries and they hadn't paid contractors and things like that. Yeah, surely, in terms of transparency and accountability, you are likely to have a better outlook. But in terms of the possibly also much more serious or equally serious area of driving the economy with indices that would be expected as best practice. By those indices, I mean interest rates at maybe monetary policy rate, for example, at 2 or 3%, but certainly not 13%. 13% monetary policy rate, you are sending a signal that, look, we don't want much development in this country, we don't want much expansion in this country, because by 13% you are making cost of funds excessively high, especially also when simultaneously the government is also willing to pay 16% or 17% for its long-term borrowings. So you find that there is a contradiction. The contradiction is so evident, but somehow the authorities hope that the media would gloss over it and not understand it, and keep, like you have done, keep saying things like, oh, the poor banks, they are going to be short of liquidity. Meanwhile, the people who are in charge of liquidity are telling you, that's no problem. We already know there's going to be 800 billion. So you can see, Harriet, there's a disconnect between the reality here and the substance.
So in reality, the MPC holds its meeting next week. And of course, this is one of the things they're going to be deliberating on, talking about interest rates and the rest of it. Do you think there should be a shifting of stance in the benchmark interest rate, for instance, from 13%?
You see, that's no question, because if you want to drive an economy, you cannot drive it with cost of funds in the region of 20-something% to the real sector. You cannot also drive it in a situation where the exchange rate of your currency is continuously under pressure, and you cannot also achieve those kind of indices of maybe inflation rate of 1 or 2%. You see, we're talking of wanting to be a world-class power. But we don't want to do or recognize those drivers that take you there. You can never see a world-class economy where cost of funds in the real sector is 20-something% and has remained so for very long. So I honestly don't have much faith in the Monetary Policy Committee, because they really don't seem to know what they are doing. If they did, then we should be enjoying relatively more comfortable and supportive indices like maybe maximum 5%, 6% lending rate to the real sector, inflation at 1 or 2%. These are the things we should be looking for. We should not celebrate failures of 20-something% and then find also that within those failures there are contradictions which are totally inexplicable of government itself crowding out the real sector by wanting to borrow so much. If the government is going to borrow 800 billion in the next 2 months or so, and then you say, oh, but then what do? They borrow the money and then they give it to the real sector or as intervention. You see, the whole thing is clumsy. So, but our thinking should be straightened out so that our actions will be in consonance with our expectations. And those expectations must necessarily be driven by the indices that support or drive growth in any economy. And seriously, this means that any monetary policy committee that has no solution of bringing MPR to 1 or 2% for over donkey years, and yet retains that position and collects their allowances. I mean, you must be very suspect that these people really don't have the interests of Nigerians at heart.
Well, that's your perspective on that one, Mr. Boye. But we'll take a quick break and we'll continue this conversation. Well, the conversation with Mr. Henry Boye continues after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Business Morning on Channels Television. The last lap of the show. We still have economic analyst Henry Boyo here in the studio with me as we take some closing comments on the issue at hand. So, for you, going forward, in the short to medium term, what are your expectations for Nigeria's financial space? There's been a lot of conversations that maybe, just maybe, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in a bid, to, apart from the fact that you talked about, mopping up the excess liquidity in the system, should begin to also look at, the banks further doing a consolidation. Do you share the same view?
There's no issue about further consolidation. Every bank should not be goaded into expanding its base or its equity base. It should not be something that is driven. It should be something that grows out of the system. There should be a need for it. In other words, the amount of consolidation directives we've had in the last few years or so may be totally inappropriate. It should have been left to the banks to grow or merge as they require based on the market needs.
Okay, because you see, based on this implementation of the TSA, we've seen some banks right-sizing and form conversations more like this is going to come in the days ahead. And so some people have been speculating that maybe there should be, talk about another consolidation for the banking sector. Well,
as I explained to you earlier on, even when 75% of government deposits were withdrawn, the banks did not complain. It didn't have such a disastrous poisonous effect on the banks. So another 25% is not going to do much harm to them, especially if the government remains benevolent and nice to them by ensuring that they keep the banks fully occupied and profitable, by paying them interest rates which are totally in consonance with what you normally should pay for what are normally called sovereign risk-free investments. We are violating all the rules, all the rules of probity and possibilities of growth and things like that. We're doing it all wrong, unfortunately. So I don't think that we should make consolidation a mandatory exercise. It should be left to each bank to grow organically based on the market needs. I think this, should I say, military mentality still pervades almost everything we do. We feel that the government agencies or whatever know best. They really don't. If they did, we wouldn't be in the position in which we find ourselves at the moment.
Mr. Henry Boyo, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Henry Boyo is an economic analyst sharing his thoughts on the implementation, on effects the implementation of the TSA will have on the financial sector of the economy and the economy as a whole.